What's up, Wrap Shop Talk? So today I got Garrett Crocker,
That's right.
and the new official owner of Wrap Spot. He's been going through some changes, but he's been in the game for how many years?
Oh, I think since the 90s. I've
Really?
been in and out of the sign business since the 90s, yeah.
Cool. Well, tell us a little
Which is a
about yours.
long time ago now.
That is a long time ago.
So when I got in the sign business, um, I had a chain of donut shops, and they're always changing something in the donut business, like prices or something like that. So I was hanging out at this sign shop, and this older guy, he was probably like my age now, but at the time he was seemed like an old guy. And he's telling me about how he makes stuff, and it was all very much computer CAD driven. And that was about the time when people were moving away from sign painting and getting into cut vinyl, pre-printers, right? And I was fascinated because while I wasn't particularly artistic with a paintbrush, I was very good with technical things. And so I hung out at his place a lot. And so, I was helping him weed and mask and all these different things. And so before I knew it, I owned a plotter as a 30-inch plotter, little plotter, and I was cutting my own stuff, and then I was cutting stuff for other people. And before I knew it, I had basically a sign business out of my garage. And that was probably early 90s. And then later on, and that was right after I got out of college. Then later on, I actually opened a sign shop. And so my background is signage more than anything. And to get into actual wrap work, um, I was doing a lot of sign work, and people would ask me all the time, do you do vehicle wraps? Do you do vehicle wraps? And I'm like, if people are asking for it, I need to figure this out, because if there's that kind of demand out there, I want to be part of that. So I got into doing, vehicle wraps probably right now going on 10 years. Um, but in fairness, I've never been the person who was 100% always the installer. I do a lot of install work, but I wasn't the only installer. There's always been some partner that I've been working with,
Mhm.
employee partner that focused on the install piece. So I was always doing the sales and the design, and you talk about standardization, and all of those things needed standardization, that I just, at the time, it was just work from one job to the next and do the best you can.
Mhm.
And so it took a long time, but my background, I went to college, I got an accounting degree. I My mom always wanted me to have an accounting degree, and so I felt like, they're paying the bills, I'm going to become an accountant. But I also got a minor in marketing, and my heart was always in I remember calling my mom and saying, "Hey, I think I'm going to change the marketing major." And she's like, "Oh, no, you're not. You'll always be able to get a job as an accountant." And I have to say, the accounting background has helped me a tremendous amount being in business. Everything from taxes to understanding a chart of accounts, any of those kinds of things, understanding where a balance sheet fits into your overall business, and how the income statement is just a small part of your balance sheet. And all those things absolutely helped me. And she was 100% right. Having said that, I much more enjoyed the creative side. I've had a number of accounting positions with big companies, and going to work every day and solving that puzzle, and then the next week it's a new puzzle, wasn't that interesting to me. um, and if you're creative as an accountant, you go to jail. So,
That's true.
yeah, so you don't want to be too creative as an accountant. But I always enjoyed that creativity and making things. And so I got into doing the sign work. I actually had, after I had the donut shops, I had a sign and printing company, and I learned how to use offset printing. And together in that, I had a big space, and so I had signs and printing and screen printing, and so I've done a lot of different things in the graphics arts world. But getting to wraps was kind of a process of going from the signage, and then having people ask for, vehicle. Of course we did graphics on vehicles, but
Mhm.
fully wrapping a vehicle was a really different experience for me. And so then I had the sign shop, the Sign Universe in Gainesville for years. And recently I sold that to my employees. And decided to focus exclusively on wraps and building the wrap business and focusing on that world. I think it's nice from the perspective of being able to find a niche that you're good at, that you can grow in that niche rather than trying to be a little bit good on the CNC and a little bit good with electrical and a little bit good on graphics. It's nice to really get focused on something and grow that part of the business.
Awesome. Well, I want to go all the way back.
Okay.
Donut shops.
Donut shops, yeah.
So you were an accountant before
So-
donut shops?
So my parents owned donut shops, and with a
Okay.
name like Crocker, of course, you know.
You got
Yeah, but people said, how'd your family get in the donut business? And the bigger joke is my dad was a cop,
okay.
and so that was the bigger joke. But what was really the situation? My dad was a U.S. Marshal, and when we moved to Florida in '76, my mom, my brothers were getting older, and my dad was working a lot. My mom was looking for something to do, and so they reached out to a company that taught them the donut business. And so in '76, we had a donut shop for a number of years when I was real little. I was probably, what, 8 or 9 at that point. And then they sold that off. And later on, when my brother got out of the military, they opened another donut shop. And while I was in college, well, high school and then college. And then when I got out of college, I kind of stepped into my parents' role as the operators.
Okay.
And so I had the donut shops, and I had a small accounting firm at that point, did about 400 tax returns a year.
Really?
That was a fun world. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's only three or 4 months out of the year, though. So
But it's a grind.
yeah, it's a grinder in those months for sure.
So you've been incredibly entrepreneurial. Like you were definitely if you were 30 years old right now and I came across you as an accountant, that's my guy, because accountants are square as hell and don't do any changes. They're not curious creatures at all. In many cases, they're actually kind of just like, leave me alone. Let me just do this thing that I kind of like, this process that I have.
In college, I was there was no such thing as electronic filing, and I guess that was probably like 1987 or so, 88, and it came out, and I was like one of the very first people to do electronic filing with the IRS. And you had to buy software, and you had to troubleshoot it and all. And I was offering it to the CPA firms in town. So they would send over tax returns. I'd enter all the data, and I'd charge them like $20 to electronically file it. And there were some reasons for that they'd want to do that on certain people to get refunds faster or whatever. They also liked the idea of offering it, even though they couldn't do it. So even then, we were doing, new and interesting things with both technology as well as entrepreneurialism, I guess, finding something to do.
That's awesome. And so when you got into signs, it was because you were just hanging around the sign shops and that created the curiosity, or did you fulfill your own signs with your donut shop?
So I was making stuff for the donut shops with this older guy, and he was still charging me, but I was in there, cutting, weeding, masking.
He's like, this guy's awesome. He's paying me to
he's
work.
paying me to work. But it was just fascinating. And next door, which was even more fascinating, but much more of an art, there was a guy that did neon.
Yes.
And that was, to me, was just,
that's a craft.
yeah. That was just fascinating. He worked in the dark, which, people like that I just hadn't experienced. And it was just, a different creative outlet also. You can make things, and I like making things.
Awesome. So getting first into business, yes, it's not wraps, but business is business. It's fundamental at the end of the day. And fortunately for you, you have an accounting background, so you know how to make the numbers work. Whereas like me just starting off, I'm guessing, hoping.
But even then, there's theory in college. And I worked at a law firm my whole college career. I worked at a personal injury firm, and I was a bookkeeper for it. And I learned way more doing accounting, bookkeeping for a law firm. And I learned more about the world from the law firm than college, for sure.
Yeah.
But it definitely, you get the fundamentals, but it takes a long time to really understand things like for me, I want my rent to be around 7% of sales, right? I think that's an important metric. But you don't, when you're doing accounting work in school or for another company, you don't understand how those pieces fit together. So like in the donut business, we were always trying to achieve a 30% cost of goods sold, for example. And you don't know why though, being young and kind of stupid um, but as you get experience, all those things start to make more sense because what you find is that a percent here and a percent there really do matter.
Yes.
And it's the difference between being, maybe successful, not just profitable, but successful and not.
Hmm.
And I really struggled in the donut business because I didn't understand my labor costs. I didn't understand how that fit together with the different pieces. And so I was probably a little overwhelmed with labor costs. And, um, I think I was really good on the cost of goods sold materials, especially because I had sort of a manufacturing mentality for that. And I think that's helped me in the sign
I was
business as
about to
well.
ask that question because really baking, albeit as cooking, is manufacturing.
For sure.
1000%.
Yeah.
It just the components move a little differently, but you're having to purchase goods to create something
Right. Raw
essentially.
materials.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
So in that sense, the donut business and the sign business aren't that different.
no.
You know, just understanding materials and equipment is um, another component. When you're in the donut business, for example, you build out a shop and you're putting in plumbing, electrical, hood systems, buying equipment that's very specialized. So you need a 10-year lease because once you do that plumbing and putting bathrooms and all those kinds of things, you really need to
It's for you.
amortize that over something, right?
Yeah.
In the sign business, which I got a funny story. When I first opened my sign shop in Gainesville, I started with a laser, so I was actually engraving universe. Okay, and my big plan, I was working out of the garage selling name tags and things like that. Anything I could laser engrave, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then I bought a printer because I'd been in the sign business before, so I bought a printer and it became 90% of my business. And I'm still running as engraving universe and I had a customer who came to me and said, "Hey Garrick, you're in the sign business. It's not in your name. You really need it in your name." And I was like, I really don't care
Yeah.
about, they call Garrick. They don't call engraving universe.
Hmm.
But I opened the sign business. I'd opened donut shops. We had two, and then I opened a third one and a fourth one and a fifth one and a sixth one later on. And when you open a business like that, you're on the corner. It's a busy corner. People see the coming soon sign forever. And people come and line up around the building on opening day. And that's what my experience was. I opened Engraving Universe. I didn't have a customer. I literally didn't have anybody coming in. We put the sign up and I didn't understand business to business sales was totally different. Now there were some similarities. You had to have equipment, you had to have build out on your leasehold improvements and all those kinds of things. But it was a very different model selling business to business than it was selling retail.
I'm sure the
It was,
retail scares me. I prefer business to business. I was the
yeah.
adverse.
And like advertising works differently. You can do a coupon and people will try it out because it's a coupon. Business to business is all about relationships. And And so those are the kinds of things where accounting is different than, like learning it in college and learning business and understanding long term, the real thing that the sign business is relationships,
Yeah.
selling for the sign business is relationships. And so it took me a long time to get there.
Right. And so you started off with lettering and stuff, and that's like late 90s, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, early 90s, well, mid 90s, I
Mid
guess. Yeah.
90s.
And like I
And
said, there was a transition and the painters were all saying, this thing ain't going to
yeah.
take over.
No, I studied kind
And
of the history because sign painting has always fascinated
yeah.
me. Like,
And the Rollins were starting to come out at that point, and the ink would last on them about 6 months out in the sun, and it would turn to white almost.
yeah.
So the technology wasn't quite there. That's why I didn't get into it.
Hmm. The How long was it until you got into the bigger signs? Because
So
that's an older business anyway.
yeah, so I ended up going back to accounting for a number of years, and I moved to Gainesville, and I was working for a company that was bought out by a private equity firm, and the private equity firm didn't care about the customers, frankly, and it had been owned by a family. It was a big company. It was sold for $1.8 billion. So it was a family business that was really large.
Hmm.
But the private equity firm that came in was very different than what we were used to. And in 2008 we had the big decline the Great Recession.
Oh yeah.
And I was working for this company, and they were like, "Oh, you need to cut staff." And I'm like, we're kind of insulated here in Gainesville. We're still making $1.2 million, which I went from 1.4 million adjusted EBITDA down to 1.2 million, even at the worst point. And they're like, you got to lay off people, and you got to go no service people and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, listen, this is what makes this business. And so at that point, I turned in my resignation. I said, I can make money doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, like I said, I decided to open the sign shop again. So there was a pretty good gap between the 2000s when I had a sign shop in Denellen
Yep.
for so I had my sixth donut shop, and as luck would have it, the unit next door to me opened up, and I opened a sign shop in it, and then I sold the donut shop and focused on the signs.
So funny. It's like donuts and signs.
Yeah, I mean, well, you work all night and you got to do something
Yeah,
during the
you gotta
day.
do something. I want to go something that you said that a lot of people don't understand. EBITDA.
EBITDA,
So
yeah.
so
Earnings before income tax and depreciation and amortization.
yeah, accountant phrases.
Yeah, stuff like that.
But to put it in perspective, what he was saying during like them saying cutbacks, you guys were probably doing 5 to 7 million revenue then to be worth $1 million EBITDA.
I was taking 30% to the bottom line.
Okay, so then you were a little lower,
Oh,
3.5 to 4.
right.
But so that's an incredibly healthy business.
Oh, yeah.
And you're
Oh,
saying that we're so profitable at 30% that we don't need to cut people because this is what allowed us to get to 30%. And there's an important lesson there. That's why
right.
I was curious
Yeah.
as to like the generic specifics of that. Like big companies only look at the numbers in the forecast of what they see for that, but you had the pulse of like, no, like,
Well, what you got to understand about Gainesville is it's a tremendously governmental area.
yeah.
We've got Shands Hospital, UF Health, and UF Health is a very stable industry in Gainesville.
Mm-hmm.
You have the VA, you have the city, the county, and all these different entities that are driving the economy there that's different than, say, the folks that were in a similar location, say in Houston or in, anywhere else in the United States.
Sure.
We were very insulated from the downturn of 2008. Not that we weren't completely insulated. I mean, I'd have customers come in and go, it was a country club, and how I got in the country club business was kind of odd as well. But it was a country club, and people come in, I got to drop my membership, and we were supposed to argue with them. No, we got to talk you out of it. And I'm like, if we treat people well, they don't want to stop coming. They want this, and they will be back as soon as possible if I treat them well.
Yes.
And so, there was a philosophical difference between my way of, running the local facility and the company, and my boss, which was a different person than the person that hired me and all.
Right.
So I was like, you know what, I can make money doing anything. And I believe that. I believe anybody can.
Yeah.
Nobody is a prisoner of a company, and I think that we have to make wise decisions. And I'm not certain that 2008, 2009 was the best time to open my business. But I got to tell you, what worked out for me is that I opened up, and within 6 months, the fast signs down the street closed up. And a few months later, another sign shop closed up. And they had a lot of, I think that they were bloated with too many employees, or maybe some legacy costs that they didn't understand. And it really kind of impacted them more heavily. But I ended up with, my thought when I got into the business is, all I need is 10% of this market. I'll be one of the 10 guys. If I can get 10%, I'll be okay.
Right.
I know every person in town from my previous job. Nobody's going to not take my phone call.
Yeah.
Right. So I felt I had a position that was a little bit better than some people opening up at that point, but I was really fortunate that these other locations did not survive. And I ended up with about 15% market share fairly quickly because,
Yeah.
they had to go somewhere at that point.
So I want to break this open. Like, I don't want anybody to mistake this, that this is a sign conversation. This is a business conversation. It doesn't matter what you're in.
For sure.
Because right now, there are multiple wrap shops either shutting their doors or about to, because of just something as simple as a political climate.
Right.
Right? There are people that I have, conversed with that are either tired, fed up, because these last, like, let's just say 5, 6 years have been very odd.
Right.
Since COVID, it's just
Yep.
been odd. There has been no
COVID
way
was a
to,
crazy time.
but when you look at your before, you could kind of like project, and it's more like, man, what is going on? Like, it's just like aliens like coming. Like, it's just like you can't predict the future anymore, right?
I think that stress tires people out.
And it's been high stress for the last 5, 6 years,
Right.
and I think that more so than the economy, that people are just tired.
Right.
From a mix of, like, there's certain things that are happening in their businesses, and they're
Technology is changing so
that
quickly.
too.
There's a lot of different impacts on a human
And
being.
then inflation hits, and they don't know how to use these new tools yet to like leverage something to get that ROI back, and all these other things. Like, it's crazy because when you, like, say, compare a wrap cost to a burger,
Right.
our McDonald's is like $15 for one person instead of four.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, our wraps didn't jump up 3 times the price.
I'm wondering why
It's
some
strange
days,
when you really.
and I'm also wondering if maybe it should, or how I need to leverage that, because I go out to dinner.
Yeah.
My wife and I eat out a lot, an unusual amount, because we're trying to have experiences and do things and have fun. And we go to a lot of the same places over and over, and I can tell you every time they change the menu, I know what it was the time
Mm-hmm.
before, because being in that industry, I just think about what does it cost to change menus?
Yeah,
There's a cost there, and these prices are skyrocketing.
they are.
And so I tell my wife jokingly every time we go out to eat, tomorrow I'm raising prices.
Yeah. So,
But there's a lot of, I think what people miss with inflation is that you're always behind the eight ball, and you're trying to catch up every time. And so if you're not proactive about understanding your numbers, then what you end up with is that you make a radical change. I had a customer come to me the other day,
yeah,
hasn't been to me since 2019. And I said, he gets a partial wrap. It's not a big deal. Some stripe across the bottom, logos. And I said $1,200. And he goes, last time it was eight.
yeah,
I'm like, last time it was pre-COVID, if nothing else. I mean, this has been a long time. And what you really got to understand is how radically the world's changed. He didn't see it from 800 to 900 to 1,000 to
right.
1,200. He just saw from 8 to 1,200. And so that's the part that if you don't change as you go along as a owner, you go from the 800 to the 1,200, and that can shock your business.
Absolutely.
So you need to be making those incremental changes as material prices change.
Right.
And it's hard. I mean, the more, when I have employees that are doing parts like, let's say, purchasing, if I'm removed from it and I don't see it, then I don't deal with it and I don't adjust accordingly. So I need a feedback loop on that makes sure that I understand. But this transition that I've had recently, where I opened up the new shop, segregated it from the sign shop, I bought inventory, I bought materials, I bought equipment, I bought all these different things, and it has been eye-opening again, kind of like back when I
Yeah.
opened up Engraving Universe. It's been eye-opening to look back and go, this is my rent, this is my square footage, this is what I've got to keep it coming in every day for that square footage. And doing that over and over again now has been a real boost to me growing this business in the future, because I'm re-examining all those things that I thought I knew.
Yeah. And it doesn't take much, but so that is a topic in itself. But also, going back to starting in 2009, right now is the best time to start a wrap shop,
Agreed.
because the amount of talent that might enter that you would have not had access to is going to be available, and they need a place to work.
So I believe this on two different levels. Okay, first of all, the amount of talent that's coming in, because let's just throw out a technology that might happen, and let's just say that self-driving cars become the regular thing, and truck drivers are now displaced. It's just something that I can imagine in my world.
Sure.
I can't. In the olden days, it might have been typesetters who were displaced by printers, for example. But let's just say all those people come into the workforce now that need a different occupation. And let's say the transition's good and all that kind of stuff. That's one thing to think about, is that they could become skilled installers, skilled salespeople, skilled operators, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also the opportunity they can become owners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the more people are introduced to the idea of being self-employed is critical because, and I think that in some ways there are certain industries where people are in them and they can see themselves buying into. So I think to your point, it's not just about the skilled labor, it's also about the ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like we are even picking up our current salesperson is from HVAC.
Oh, awesome.
I want it.
My last salesperson went to
Yeah.
HVAC.
Yeah, I mean, but he came from HVAC because he was tired of the like the PE push. So he wanted,
Well, they're struggling with things like I know a guy who's in HVAC, the previous salesperson.
hmm
He's these kids come to work for me and they become like my kids. They move on to different things,
hmm
but we're still in touch and we're still friends and so forth. And he was telling me that he's got a 300-day wait on manufacturing some of his products to sell. And he's struggling with those customer relationships
I
because
couldn't
their needs
imagine.
are less than that, obviously. They're
hmm
pulling from one job to put on another job if that job is running behind.
And they have a technology shift right now, which should be a loop of like pay attention to our industry too. When there will be a technology hit at some point,
Sure.
we don't know when. Like it's kind of like can't really imagine it until it happens. But like you always have to have your eyes up to
I got a question
shift and
for you.
change. Sure.
Do you think that in our industry, which I believe really positive things are coming from a technology standpoint, um, but do you think that the first area that'll be impacted is design?
I think entirely design. I
Yeah,
think AI will take over design entirely.
yeah,
I think as AI gets, let's say, when Adobe really figures out AI, like
right.
screw ChatGPT. That's how everybody looks at it through the lens of
Sure.
GPT
Well, it's how people
but
apply
but
AI to their business model.
correct. That's the only availability. But the moment, like it's already kind of happening with Adobe with like the extra filling in the gap and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But when you talk about like 2 or 3 years of AI figuring out itself in Adobe to then craft you something,
Right.
you
Well,
can,
recently I did a wall wrap. It was about 900 square feet of wall wrap, not huge, but a big area, about a full room. And every bit of it was designed by a designer who was a great designer using prompts.
mm,
And, like it's a wooded scene and hey, can you add a pathway through here? And
mhm.
oh, this isn't the tree that's in this area of this town. We want to add some of this other tree. Boom, boom, boom. It's all there. And so it was 100% AI driven, which for me was very, very interesting that, that we're already seeing some of that.
Yeah. No, I think it's coming. I think it's getting better.
I
I
mean, there's
don't,
still some shortcomings for sure.
but it's dangerous in a good way. So like now, let's just say client doesn't want to pay for design for upfront, change your process. It's a feedback loop. There's a, for some reason, there's a lack of trust because of so many Johnny's, uncles, whatever's, like, for whatever reason, right?
Same thing with photography.
Exactly. So instead, you can say, I can build a GPT for a quick prompt. Listen, here's some things based on a design debrief. Like, this is some options to kind of get you started. Here's also our portfolio. We have no problem taking care of you. We would like to, and instead of just saying no, give them the finger, like you've already known that that's a feedback loop in your business and it cost you 5 minutes because you set up the framework to answer very promptly.
Well, I think, this is another business thing, but it kind of relates to our business pretty heavily. And that is there's going to be adjustments. And so I don't think that you can be stagnant. You can't be rigid. You've got to look for those opportunities. As like I told you, I originally started off engraving. I got in the sign business and 90% of my work is signage because that's what people wanted.
hmm
It wasn't that I was a great salesperson of signage. People wanted it. And so I pivoted to doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we're looking at is how can we continue to keep our margins where they are? How can we continue to keep our sales where they are and pivot to the things that AI can't do? And I think that there's huge opportunity there because it's a long way off before somebody can do the skilled install piece, for
Of
example.
course. The So you said keep your margins where there are. I know many of shops that are not making margins.
Yeah.
As an accountant,
Wait, define what you mean by that.
so basically what I'm saying is that people are not. I was at a shop, beautiful shop, been in business since the 90s, about 1.2 million sales, which is totally fine. Whether you're a growth personality or a lifestyle personality, I didn't really dive deep into that with them, but that's where they're at, 1.2 million. That's a pretty long time to hit 1.2, but they've got a great business, a great establishment, but they're tired, they're run down. I could see a tiny bit of like disdain for the business itself, like they hated it.
But when you start to hate your customers, that's a sign.
I don't think they hate their customers entirely.
Every once in a while, you run into one you do.
but but it was just more like they weren't pleased with their situation, or maybe felt like it could have been better off or further off based on the tenure that they had in the
Right.
business. So then let's talk about the people who are maybe on year 5 or 6, that's on that cusp of like, when is this going to crack open? And really it can crack open at any time.
Right.
It's not because it hasn't cracked open, it's because they don't take full advantage of what they actually have yet.
I think there's a couple different pieces with that, and that is, it's hard to feel good about something when you're struggling financially. You know.
1000%, because it's
100%.
your scoreboard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but it's also hard to constantly be reinvesting, and that's what it takes in those first 5 years.
Hmm.
And it's funny. Like today, I needed to ship something, but I didn't have a set of scales. But now I got to go out and buy a set of scales, which I didn't think about last week because I had a set of scales at the last shop for 10 years or whatever. So
Right.
you get into that constantly, even into year 3 and 4 and 5, reinvesting that money and that energy and that equity, that sweat equity. You're constantly and you're like, when is the point where I don't have to buy another printer for a while? I get this one paid off and I get to use that one. Well, the reality is you will probably pay off a printer at the end of its useful life. So you can't live with the idea that you're going to pay off that printer and have a few years on it.
Hmm.
You have to look at it from the perspective of, I've got to pay for this printer as I go along and have my margins over and above it. Now, I will say that there are certain pieces of equipment that I think we do benefit from getting a longer than its lease life, or whatever you want to call your financing situation. And that's like your laminator
And plotter.
and plotter. Yeah, which I see you have an 8600 here.
I have 4 of them.
And I love the 8600. I'm not a big fan of this new 9000.
No,
I got a 9000 the other day and I'm struggling with, it's just not as good as the 8600
I
to
will.
talk shop.
I have some for sale.
Well, I've got a 9000 I got to pay for a while.
Hmm. So you could probably dive into this better than me, but I was taught this by my mentor CFO, that printer, you could set this up in QuickBooks to do it for you automatically to go ahead and project this expense. But if that printer costs, let's call it $20,000, because you just bought an Epson, I
Yep.
think it was 20 grand, then, and its shelf life is
Yeah,
X. That means that you take 5 years divided by $20,000, and then this costs you this much per day,
right.
right?
Well, and here I break it down even further.
Okay.
Well, you said per day, and that's where I go to it.
Okay.
Okay, so like in the sign business, I bought a flatbed UV printer for $100,000 over 60 months, and let's just say it's $2,000 a month. I'm open 20 days a month.
Hmm.
It's $100 a day,
Hmm.
and I did it that way because I didn't know if I had enough work for it, right? And so I had to think about it from that perspective of, do I have enough sign work to justify that kind of equipment, right? And at $100 a day, I'm like, oh, if I don't have $100 a day worth of work for that, I'm really not in the sign business, right? And I hear that same thing with roll tables. I hear the same, I can't justify a roll table. Well, if you break down the $18,000 or whatever it is, and that's one of those things that will last 10 years or better.
I need one.
And well, but if you're looking at it as a per day cost, it's like the belt I'm wearing. If I wear that thing for 30 years, the cost per day is so close to nothing
Yep.
that you buy the absolute best one you can.
Yes.
And that's where you've got to start to look at. But it's the same thing that I do to the customer, and I'll tell you how that is. It's like, I tell people, amortize a van wrap over 3 years in your mind. They go, should I do a full wrap or a partial wrap or some lettering or some magnets or whatever? And I'm like, okay, listen, here's how you know. Take that wrap price or that wrap value or that lettering value or whatever it is and amortize it over 3 years. And so let's say it's $3,600 because I can do math easier that way. That's $100 a month. If you say to me, I can justify $100 a month in advertising, then you need to do the full wrap at $3,600. And so we're doing that same thing on the sales side. We're amortizing it for them over the time to understand the value. But you also have to do that for yourself internally on equipment.
Mhm.
And so, you get to the point where you're sitting there going, oh, this machine costs me $20,000 or whatever it is. But you break that down per day, and that's also why I think it's so important to keep your calendar filled, per day, because
Mhm.
you've already made that calculation on a per day. Your labor's coming in on a per day fee.
Yep.
And so you really have to break each one of those things. A lot of people are like, I want to break this down into an hourly cost of whatever. And that's great. Right. But for me, I can't get into the weeds that much with my all the other things I have going on. So I break it down in the day, not into 8 hours or I usually break things down when I break it down by the hour by 10 because I work 10-hour days at
Right.
least. So
Well, to also take that information, the reason why the shop is struggling on year 6 or 7 and not seeing the return is because they never proactively paid for the next printer during the 5-year span because it only costs $100.
right,
But you need a envelope in your bank account that says
$200.
printer
Yeah,
money, and whatever that monthly expense is, on day one of you purchasing that new printer, you should be putting that money aside.
right.
So I didn't go that granular, but I did it in a different way.
Well,
I have a
and
cushion.
sometimes what you're doing with that extra $100 is hiring the salesperson you can't afford yet.
Yeah.
And so and that's what I was talking about with reinvesting,
Yeah.
is that you might not actually set it aside, which you probably should do if you want to stay exactly that same
Mm,
size, but you reinvest it in maybe the roll table or
mm,
the salesperson. Peter's my partner with WrapSpot, and he's got a shop in Atlanta. And we had this conversation today about, what we're looking at doing next week, not what we're looking at doing today.
yeah.
And we're looking at hiring a salesperson, but we just can't justify it now. So it's an investment until
Mhm.
we can. And so sometimes that extra $100 that is because you're young and you're trying to grow the business is you're reinvesting it.
Yeah. The simpler way, that's like the very analytical way.
Yeah.
Because I'm okay with analytical. Like I can get into it really good, but I don't like to. I like to see patterns instead.
Right.
And so the way I've always done it is let me first build my 6 months nest egg.
Right.
I need to build enough insulation to where I can make a decision and it doesn't matter. And that way, if both those printers died right now, I can buy both those printers right now and it would suck.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be like, it's affecting my payroll,
Right.
right? And so instead
Yeah. You
of,
definitely want to get ahead.
yeah, and the people aren't getting ahead because I'll be honest with what I saw potentially was I saw a new Camaro and I saw another car.
Yeah.
And so it seemed like the business wasn't making money, but it actually was. The piece of equipment is just displaced and
Right.
not being accounted for.
Right.
And so if you are struggling financially, where's the waste and how can you cut from the bottom? And then also how can you increase maybe sales by another 5%? Like you were talking about 1% difference.
Hmm.
If you only changed a 2% of your bottom line every month for 6 months, you are looking at an entirely different life in 6 months.
Right. I was talking to Peter about this the other day, and what are those additional add-on items that we can sell? And my situation, with being the salesperson right now again, which by the way, I have broken now that I'm in this new location, I've broken it down into 5 key positions. And years ago, I read the E-Myth. A lot of people have read it, and what I took away from that is that every business has a bunch of positions, right? Everything from, if you're taking out the garbage, there's the janitorial position, there's the maintenance position. Well, in the wrap business, there's 5 key positions, and right now I'm four of the 5 for sure,
Hmm.
right? I have my name in those. They exist whether you acknowledge them or not, right?
Hmm.
And so as this current salesperson, I'm sitting there looking at, how can I increase sales? And one of the things that we came back to was, marginal items. Like, can I sell roof wraps? And, I've always shied away from roof wraps because I don't see the value in it sometimes. But we're already have the vehicle and we're already selling and we're already doing the work. Why not do that extra piece? Just, the fact that I don't like installing them is the reason I haven't been. So it's one of those things where I'm trying to figure out how to maybe sell that or maybe sell auto detailing or some piece that I can get that extra little margin out of every single sale.
Yeah. Do you look at what your average ticket rate is? Is that a KPI that you kind of track or feel is incredibly important?
So in absolutely, I think it's an important piece. We've been in this new location a relatively short amount of time, so it's hard to track. But I did look at it the other day, and 40% of our business is full wraps, and so I was like, in a larger percentage than ever, which was about 5%, was wall wraps. And so I'm starting to see. So to me, it's more about the product mix right now rather than average ticket. But I feel like average ticket should be in the wrap business around $2,500. And then the reason is because that justifies, doing the invoice and the quote and the handshaking and all those pieces that don't generate a lot of money. Um, so you need some amount of money coming in to cover all of those positions. Now we do charge for design, so I can't say that a proof costs me that much more because we are charging for design. So there's so the average ticket to me fixes overhead craziness,
Yeah,
the work.
right. Yeah, I was just curious about that because that's something that we recently really started trying to do is like elevate, let's just say, a C customer to a B.
Right.
I already have the customer. Like this is more for like the
Exactly.
established business of like, okay, we're 3, 4 years into it. How can we make that one client who's awesome to work with?
Yep.
How can we sell them either more or can they tack on when the vehicle is in here? Can they buy one or two more components?
Additional services, right.
Hmm.
And that's what I'm saying, like, I shied away from roofs, but why? Well, I had to ask myself that.
Right.
And you're doing upfitting, and I think that that's a fantastic example of how to take that customer to the next level.
Yeah.
And
Our average ticket went up to almost like 5,500 up from 2,500.
and that's probably um, well, it's definitely that upfitting, but it's also nice to not have to go find another customer because there's a cost to doing that.
It's the weirdest thing because um, we went through this process of like, okay, we cut signs.
Right.
And I'm gonna get your side of this in a second. So, because we're very similar, we were a sign and wrap business. I did permanent signs. I would get in the bucket lift. I would do all that stuff, and I
Been there.
actually
I
kind
bought
of
one.
enjoyed it. But it was stuck as me because finding the right guys to run those things are hard. So I was like, man, permitting, all this stuff. Like I don't really feel like delegating this. Like I don't. There's a lot of energy in that, especially with government and stuff. So I'm just gonna cut it. So cut probably 500K worth of revenue off, but replaced it with cars. So in my mind, it was, can I at least get to the same product where we're not leaving the shop? So we replaced it with window tint, PPF, ceramic coating.
Mhm.
Um, it
Super smart.
did really good. We're in Florida. Tint is just the easiest thing on the planet, right? So in the sense of sales, because the cost per lead for advertising is really low. So we could literally first year did great on sales for tint. Wasn't a concern. Again, that's kind of more a retail product too. Wasn't a fan of the customer type, but it was revenue and had good margins. Um, then now, let's fast forward like 4 years later, we're in the same situation as signs with the upfitting,
Right.
where we're like, do we really like the customers that like the tint? Like if we looked at our call audit, like we went from around 200 calls a week down to 50,
Right.
and we have tripled in revenue.
Right.
And so the amount of like static or noise that we were hearing, like all the busy work with the tent and the PPF is great. I actually, if I was to start over right now, period, PPF is the play. It's the future. It's doing great. Margins are great. There's actually probably higher yielding PPF shops than wrap shops as far as revenue. It's not uncommon for a $5 million PPF shop.
Okay.
It's just not. Wrap shops are like, I'm dying to get $1 million.
Right.
But it's because there's no manufacturing component. It's, yes, I like your price. I like your business. I like your brand. Let's proceed.
And that's what I'm talking about with the hand holding. There's a lot of going back and forth when you're making a custom product.
Right. And with like, it's scary. You saw all the boxes of Expel that we have sitting over there, but we literally turned off all ads for tent. Even though we have a storefront location, that's going to cost us a little bit, but it's distracting us from everything else, which is way smoother. It's bigger accounts. It's what we want to do most importantly.
Well, so in the sign business, there came a point after COVID where it was hard to get employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know we've all felt that. And I said, well, let's not get employees, let's get rid of customers.
Yeah.
And that sounds harsh, but the idea is that if you have a limited resource of employees, you've got to maximize the per employee revenue over your per ticket revenue per se. And so, you've got to maximize the value of every single employee. There was a time, like when I was in the donut business, where you need a new employee, you put an ad out or you call somebody, and and training, of course, is very simple in that world, counter help, that kind of thing. And so, replacing an employee or adding an employee was not a huge thing. It was still a thing, and there was turnover, so that was a big thing. But in the sign business or in the wrap business, the skill level is much higher. So you've got to maximize your per employee revenue as well.
What do you feel is a healthy, since you're a number nerd, what do you feel is a healthy RPE or revenue per employee for a wrap business?
I hate to say, because every area is different.
True.
And like the costs up in Atlanta where Peter is are very, very different than my costs in
Probably much
Gainesville.
higher.
Okay. Yes, very much so.
But
right?
the opportunity factor in Atlanta is bananas right now.
But the revenue per employee is going to be much, much higher. So
For
it's
sure.
hard to say that. But I would say, in a simple area like Gainesville, if you're not doing $150,000 per employee, you're doing something, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And if you find that number, let's just say, when we had the sign shop, we're doing $1.5 million, $1.4 million, somewhere in that range, whatever, right? And you've got, 8 employees or whatever, that's kind of bloated. So,
It is.
and you've really got to look at that from a, full-time equivalent standpoint. You can't say, I've got this part-time and that part-time or whatever. You really got to look at it as an, FTE and my revenue per FTE. And I think that if you're not at least at $150,000 in a small market like mine with relatively low costs, then you're really going to struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that really needs to be closer to $200,000. And I think in a good market like Peter's, I think it's $250,000 and up.
Yeah.
And and part of that is specialization. You've got a person who's doing the washing while the person's doing the installing, and so when you can make it into a manufacturing line, then you get that improvement, right? And so in a small shop, in a small location like mine, I'm going to struggle in that world because the same guy is going to do a couple different jobs. He's going to wear a couple different hats.
Yep.
So that's why it's so radically different across big shop, small shop, big market, small market, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I think 200K should be the goal. I think at that point you would probably averaged 15 to 20%.
Well, and I think with your upfitting, it might be even more than that because the margins aren't the same as something you manufacture.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're negotiating. We've almost increased gross profit by 20%.
Right.
Which is a significant difference, but that requires buying power. So then I have to look at it strategically, like this is totally different. So how can I get buying power? Okay, let me start selling to other wrap shops that can get access and can't afford the inventory load that they require, because I'm like a Fellers essentially for a Ranger, and we just got creative with it. I just said, can I drop ship?
Right.
are there rules on that? And he said, no. I was like, fantastic. I'm gonna tell everybody about upfitting.
Right.
And we don't make any margin on it, but we make margin to our customers by selling more. So we've already hit tier 2. The guy was here yesterday. He's like, you guys are like my golden customer. Like nobody has paced y'all's pace, especially like a wrap shop.
Right.
He goes, that's why we turn so many wrap shops down, is because they're only at $1 million in revenue. And they can't afford to get in this game.
Right.
And I was like, but that's like, it's unfortunate though, because $1 million wrap shop is actually kind of like the higher end of the industry for the most part. There's like these outliers that are massively larger, but like one, pretty hard to get. 2 million, very, very few.
Right.
If they are, they're really quiet and you don't know about them.
Right.
$3-4 million wrap shops, like not many.
So, when, we were talking about tent, I was talking to a tent salesperson the other day, and I asked, to buy product for my location, and I don't do tent right now. And he said, you should buy it through your other location because you'll eventually get to a better tier. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. And he goes, and I kind of feel bad about that because I'm not going to be your salesperson. You're going to work out of the Atlanta office because that's where your sales. And I was like, at that moment, which, by the way, in Gainesville, in the sign business, we were a pretty big buyer of like Grimco type things. And so I could get, better tier because I was a pretty good buyer. But, I get into any of these other areas and I'm certainly not. Tent is a good example of one of those. And probably right now I'm a pretty small buyer even on the vinyl side.
Yeah.
You spend $100,000 on vinyl and you're the small buyer. It's, you got to get back up to $500,000 worth of buying.
Yeah. Yeah. And people, if you're struggling with expenses, just go see if you can negotiate new pricing. You get what you negotiate.
And I'm not a big person about playing people off of each other, but you do need to do your research and understand that these commodity items are at a commodity price. You can't be paying more in your market than the shop down the street is, or else you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage, which is, by the way, why I bought a flatbed printer, because I wanted to have a competitive advantage over the other people in my market.
Exactly.
So if you can get volume pricing, and what I told my salesperson way back when I first started out, I was like, how am I supposed to compete to get the job when Sinorama's got a franchise agreement,
national,
pricing, and I was told, okay, on these particular items, I can match their pricing level for you, so that you can be competitive. And all I did was ask. It wasn't brain surgery.
No.
And and going and being a nice person to people goes a long way. To can you help me out? And people honestly in those places want your business to grow and do well, and they want you as a customer, if they're not, especially if they have the other people in your area, but not necessarily as their big customer. And so, I was a big buyer of Tube Light before they got bought out by Grimco. And I was nice to them and they were nice to me, and the other buyers were buying from, maybe some other places.
Yep.
So, being nice to people, sharing what your needs are with the sales folks really does matter, and I think it helps.
Absolutely. So back to your not necessarily standardization, but specialization. That's it. You just basically cut off a lot of noise in your life with going from signs and wraps and graphics to just wraps.
Yep. And I struggle with even the idea of getting into architectural tent. I want to get into architectural tent, and I look at it from the perspective of, if I'm marketing and I want to market to the same customer all the time, so my dollar for marketing goes further. Now, this might be a bad philosophy, and I don't know. I'm not, I'm not a brilliant marketer, but I do believe that if I'm spending money to go meet with a customer and I can sell them multiple things, that's a win, right? And so if I'm selling a person vehicle wraps, and they tell me that they're having a sun problem, on their office space, to me that's a huge win, right? So that's the reason I'm thinking about getting into tent, but not tent for just anyone, architectural tent. But even that decision is wholly against what I'm trying to do, which is to specialize. Every fiber in my being says, don't get into anything else right now until you've totally mastered this one thing. And then, you can add on these other little items. I don't do PPF.
Yeah.
I haven't, I don't have the skill level. And not that I can't go out and hire that skill level. I don't have the space right now. So I don't have a lot of those pieces. And I think it's a completely different customer than what I'm used to doing. So, at some point I'm sitting there going, what do I want to get into? I have a limited amount of resources in my time. And do I want to spread that over so, more products? And the answer right now, especially, is I want to go that opposite direction for a while until I really hone in. And then I'll pick up these ancillary items. And I think I've always said that the right thing presents itself. And so if you stay in something long enough, I think you'll get an opportunity that will direct you towards some of these things as well.
Yeah, the commercial. So there's a play that I paid a sales coach that did 5 million in commissions on door knocking for like AT&T, Comcast, all this stuff. And he wrote me up a sales plan with compensations and all that stuff. And he was like, man, your product kind of sucks. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you sell this thing for like $4,000, this wrap, and then you don't see them again for 5 years and or until they buy another $50,000, $60,000 unit.
Right.
He's like, that kind of sucks. How can we make more money?
Right.
And like we got to talking about it, and he goes, well, on this plan we have core values. Like, do you guys pitch core values to your clients? And I was like, not really. He was okay. And then this is his, and he goes, and you guys sell 10 too, right? And I was like, yeah. So he goes, all right. And like he was just in pure flow state. It was just like flowing off the top of his head. It was awesome to witness. But he was like, you're gonna sell your wrap. 2 weeks later, you're gonna have a trigger that tells you, hey, you need to follow up on that wrap in person at their office. And then just say, hey, just checking in on this wrap, blah, blah, blah. And he had a script for it. I don't recall exactly what it says, but he's like, you guys seem to operate on a higher level. Do you guys have core values? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, why aren't they on your wall?
Right. Wall
To
wrap.
sell a wall wrap.
Right.
And then he said, while you're working there, like, geez, man, it's hot in here. Is your admins, like, we do architectural window. Like, he had a three-way play
Right.
of how to take one client from a $4,500 ticket to a wall wrap, which is 1,000 to 3,000.
I think wall wraps are extraordinarily important for two reasons. First of all, there's only so many square feet on a vehicle, and there's a massive number of square feet in walls that, in the long run, I think that they're going to be a much bigger part of our product mix.
I think they
Same
will.
skill level, same printer, designs may be similar, from a time standpoint and so forth.
And even easier for AI.
And it's all, and from an install standpoint, the skill level is certainly lower.
And you can charge the same almost with
What's happening
cheaper
is
material.
paint and painters, the cost is going up. So there's a convergence where your
Yes.
cost is not quite as bad.
And that's paying attention to something that's completely unrelated to our industry. But
Right.
yes, that's why color changes are becoming even more prominent for these retail type shops, because I didn't realize it, but the cost of goods on paint is so high that a used to be $5,000 paint job is actually 15
Right.
now. So
Yeah,
now
there's
it's
no more
like,
$99 paint jobs out there.
no. So
I feel so bad for the local Mako guy because he does a really quality job from what I understand. And he is burdened by the, advertising that they used to do on cheap wraps. I mean,
mhm.
on cheap paint.
Yeah, our Mako shop's actually really good too. We have a franchise that has a yellow vehicle that comes through here, and it's Mako paint, and we stick on it, and they're clean for Mako. Can't complain at all.
Right.
But even then, like it's just gone up. So I do think I hadn't considered wall wraps from that perspective, but you're right.
Well, there's a lot of square footage there.
Yeah.
And like I said, the cost is a convergence. Even though our prices are here, the cost of the other
For just a
opportunity.
color.
Right. And when I'm talking about it from the perspective of, say, a restaurant or a retail shop, and they get so much value out of that branding that the difference is just crazy. And another piece of that puzzle is that I was doing I wrapped a couple of years ago, I wrapped every wall in a restaurant.
Mhm.
Okay. And it was the first time I'd ever wrapped an entire place.
Mhm.
And the whole thing was, let's just say it was $14,000 or whatever. It was a big number for me. And back then it was a lot of square footage for me. Now I would be like, maybe it would be more. But the interesting thing about it is when they built that facility out, they spent about $800,000. So as a percentage of the overall build out for that restaurant, in an existing building, the wrap part of it was, you know, percent or two, you know, I mean, it was very small and the impact was massive.
Yes.
And so when you look at, if they'd have painted those walls, it would have been some cost, you know, let's say $2,000 or $3,000. And so by, you know, they primed them, we wrapped them. It's, it's an amazing value from the perspective of how much the overall project was. This was, you know, minuscule.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the way you just put that, like the way my mind just started firing off is like you can actually build a whole campaign and the value prop is in the wrong place for most of us. When we're talking to these people, we're like, ah, yeah, it's pretty or it brands your stuff, but really those are numbers that are kind of like visionary-ish,
Right.
right? But when you could say, listen, automatically subtract $3,000, you're gonna pay that anyway.
Right. So you're at 1% of construction cost
Yep.
difference, 1%,
Yeah.
and the impact is 30%.
Yeah.
You know, Peter says that I sell great on value, but I believe in it.
I think that's awesome.
And if you're an owner of a business and you don't believe in it, it's much harder, I would think.
Yeah.
But I do believe in it because the numbers don't lie when it comes to value. Advertising on a, you know, you can't name. By the way, I got a new value on advertising for reps, and that is, um, you know, let's say that you're doing a social media campaign, right? And you have to both pay for that every single week, quite a lot, maybe every day or every month, or however you want to look at your payments, right? And on a, you know, you wrap a vehicle and you pay for it one time, okay? But the more important thing is that you create that content one time and you are not going back creating content every single week and having to spend all that time and energy. So there's another value in your wrap is that you set it and forget it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said this to somebody the other day and they were like, oh my goodness, you know, I spend so much time creating content that I never figured my time into the cost. I only considered what I was
The cost
paying
for the ads.
to promote it. And I was like, well, if you think about the wrap from that perspective, you know, you're saving 3 years of creating content time.
Yeah.
And that's a number.
Yeah.
And they were like, boy, that makes it easy.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, to wrap things up on this, I mean, what is some, I mean, dude, you're wise. Like I love the fact that you have an accounting background, that you're
I
also,
wished I used it more in the
but
business.
you do, just not to the degree maybe like, cause me observing you, like you clearly do, but you, from the perspective of an accountant, maybe no.
Right.
From the perspective of a small business owner,
Yeah.
to a
Constantly thinking about it.
much higher level, because most business owners avoid it like the plague.
Right.
But I also think what's cool is you're like a little unicorn where you also are incredibly curious.
Yes.
Like, and I think so. I just came across a metaphor, and then I'll get to the point, which is that we are running a science lab that is mistaken as a business, and very low level scientists would say, well, why can't you, or why isn't this, or whatever. And instead, you're kind of like, that didn't
Pull
work
this
out.
lever, what's going to happen over there?
That didn't work out how I thought it was, but why?
Right.
Okay, what can we adjust? What can we recalibrate? What can we do? And then eventually you figure out, like you said, the puzzle
Right.
for whatever that is.
And I think that's why I don't want to get too distracted on too many products right now, because I really am diving deep into, you know, this core product.
Yeah, and I think that's important because we don't have this recipe solved in our industry. You look at other industries, and that's why we struggle so hard to get to $1 million, is because we have zero standardization. We have everybody doing everything different, and everybody's like, we don't really know the recipe. Like an HVAC guy can go buy an HVAC, or a restaurant guy can go buy a restaurant,
Right.
and they know exactly the play to do.
Well, you know, I was at a Italian restaurant the other day and they didn't serve ranch dressing. And I was like, you know, okay. And they're like, it's not Italian. I mean, I was like, well, that's true. You've got a
Yeah.
good point. That makes sense, you know. Um, you know, when you talk about standardization, it just dawned on me that every wrap shop has these 5 positions, and it never, you know, before I was like, oh, you know, you know, what's the puzzle look like? Well, until I opened up again and started really creating this stuff, it really started to make sense to me. You've got an office manager, you got a sales manager, you've got a production manager, you've got a graphic design. I call him the creative director. It's the person who works with the graphic designers. And you've got the install manager. And when you break it down into those 5 pieces, it really is much easier to say, okay, today I'm wearing one of those hats, but I don't want to wear it, right? So I'm going to get out of being the office manager at some point. I'm going to get out of being the sales manager at some point. I'm going to get out of being the creative director at some point. I'm going to get out of being the production manager at some point. I'm going to get out of being the install manager, and then I'm going to be a real owner instead of an employee of the business.
Right.
Once you fill those positions in the wrap business, I really think that because install can be over specialized installers, the install manager. Sales manager can be over the specialized managers in the sales department. And your office manager can really keep an eye on all those pieces, the KPIs and all those things, making sure the invoice goes out. And so once you fill those 5 positions, everything else underneath it should be filled by a competent person. And until I reopened, it had never dawned on me what those specific pieces were.
Yeah. And how many more hats do you have when you have all those extra services?
Yeah. I mean, I took out the garbage this morning, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, I kind of did it as a pride thing. I want to, make sure the shop looked good. But at the end of the day, I was like, I'll be glad to have this hat on somebody else, and I think what you find is, you find value in every single person that's in that organization when you outline that there's a position, and right now your name's in it, and then when you cross out your name and put their name, there's value in that person that's in that position as well.
100%. What advice would you give to an up and coming shop that's just in it with so many years of business?
So like new business
Newer,
or
let's just say 0 to 3 years.
So I would say pace yourself. Don't forget to have the weekends. By the way, the reason I got into the sign business, not into the donut business again, is because we do have some huge values in this business, and one of them is in the wrap business, everything is scheduled, right? So you're not going to have somebody pop in on you. I mean, it happens, I'm sure, but you're not going to have somebody pop in and say, hey, I need to wrap my vehicle and here's my artwork. I mean, you got to work through this process. So you can create a life around this business.
Right.
And so what I would say to the person, still have your weekends, make sure you draw money out every single week and all those kinds of things that when you're starting out, you forget to do. You're constantly, going so many directions. You still have to have an understanding that it's a scheduled business. And I think that's one of the best things about the wrap business is that it's scheduled, and you can have a really, you're talking about, people are in certain businesses for a lifestyle and all. But if you're in the restaurant business, you're working weekends, holidays, nights. And when everybody else is enjoying their life, you're not. And in this business, you can do that.
If you design it that way.
If you design it that right. And you need to, from day one, consider what I just said with positions and trying to take your name off of every one of those items and putting in the correct person. Because when you do that, I think you said it the other day in one of the shows, you were saying that when you find that, it's magical. And so during that first 3 years, your goal should not be necessarily growing the top line. It's creating all of those positions and putting the right person into them. And that, I believe the top line will take care of itself when you do that. And, you're talking about sales manager who creates the sales team, that whole thing, powerful. That could be a game changer to figure that out.
Yeah. I think hiring the right people is the most important thing you can do, because the value prop on that individual doing a great job is just,
it's astronomical.
Can't even touch it.
Yep.
So awesome, man. This was fun. Like, I have yet to dive into business from this angle. So it was a lot of fun. I was like, I've never had so much fun talking about numbers in my life.
Well, and that's kind of one of those puzzle parts that I do enjoy about it. I hate, recording a material is in the program and all that. But I think, you know, that's one of those areas where AI is going to get better and
Yeah.
better as well.
Awesome, man. Well, it was great having you. I'd
Thank
love to
you.
hear more in the future as RapSpot keeps getting bigger and bigger.
That's the plan.
All right, brother. I'll see you.
Thanks.